Hey everyone, this is Pastor Scott coming to you with our Gospel Seed study, this time bringing you a little bit of extra seed. So a lot of our group leaders have said, hey, we really enjoyed the teaching, maybe we could have some extra just to kind of unpack that. So we're going to go back into that John 4 story of Jesus meeting with the woman at the well in Shechem in Sychar. Now, as Jesus is speaking with the woman at the well, any of the Jewish readers of John's Gospel, that's going to be setting off some alarms in their mind of saying, wait a minute, Jacob's well, Shechem, there's other stories that have taken place there. If we go back to Genesis chapter 28, we find that this is where Jacob is going through the region of Shechem, builds the well. It's also the exact spot where he has the vision. He falls asleep, has a dream of angels ascending and descending on that place. Jesus draws on this exact passage earlier in John's Gospel. He tells Philip, you're going to see the angels ascending and descending on the Son of Man, referring to himself. So Jesus is already making a claim of a connection with Jacob at the site where Jacob's well was, saying, I am going to be the place where the angels, in other words, that there's like this opening between heaven and earth. And Jesus is now going to embody that in himself. So that's the first piece that we're beginning to build. Now, from there, in Genesis 29, Jacob goes to another well where he meets his wife, Rachel. Okay, so we're beginning to build these pieces. Jacob eventually becomes the father of the tribes of Israel. In fact, his name is changed to Israel. Fast forward to later in the Old Testament. Israel is the name for the northern tribes. Judah is the name for the southern tribes. They kind of have a little bit of a conflict of which one does God love better. The people in Judah say, well, clearly we're favored because Jerusalem is here and that's where the temple is. So what happens? The northern 10 tribes of Israel are invaded by the Assyrians and taken off into captivity. And the folks in Judah are like, see, told you, we're more favored. All right. All of that takes place 700 years before the time of Jesus. Now, the people in Judah thought that we must be God's favorite until 200 years later when the Babylonians come and destroy Jerusalem as well. Both Israel and Judah are now in exile, in captivity. But then the Judeans are allowed to come back and rebuild the temple in Jerusalem. In the meantime, the Assyrians have intermingled with the Israelites, and so now they're a mixed breed called the Samaritans. So this is all interplay behind what's happening when Jesus goes to Samaria. Okay, let's go back. The woman says when Jesus begins to speak, I perceive that you are a prophet. In the Old Testament, the last prophet that is speaking to the Israelites before the destruction by Assyria is the prophet Hosea. Hosea is told by God to marry a woman that is a prostitute. In other words, she's been sleeping with other men who are not her husband. Interesting. Hosea has a couple prophecies about Israel, the northern tribes that are based in Samaria by the time of Jesus. In fact, Hosea even prophesies to Samaria and says exactly this, that your sin is represented by Gomer, the woman that Hosea marries, who is sleeping with men that are not her husband, and it personifies Israel's sin with other foreign gods. They've basically been playing the harlot with other gods besides the one true living God. So the message of Hosea is this: Israel is like a woman that's been out sleeping with men that are not her husband. But Hosea's message goes on from there. In Hosea chapter 1:10 it says, however, in the future, the number of the people of Israel will be like the sand of the sea that can neither be measured nor numbered. In other words, it will be like a great harvest. Although it was said to them, you are not my people, it will then be said, you are the children of the living God. Then the people of Judah and the people of Israel will be gathered together. They will have one leader and will flourish in the land. So the woman hears Jesus and says, you're like a prophet. The last prophet was Hosea. And Jesus speaks to her and says, The man you're now with is also not your husband. Jesus is drawing on those prophetic images from Hosea the prophet 700 years earlier that God is going to redeem the northern tribes and welcome them back into the great harvest when Judah and Israel will both have one that will lead them back into relationship with God. In fact, in Hosea chapter 2, verse 18, God makes this prophecy that says, "At that time, declares the Lord, you will return to me and call me your husband." So Jesus is there to declare to the woman, your spiritual husband, God, has returned to redeem you, to welcome you back into fellowship with Him. So that's some of the things that are going on behind the scenes in that John chapter 4 passage at Jacob's well, drawing from Genesis, and redeeming of the nations, the tribes of Israel coming from the prophet Hosea. That's some extra seed for you this week. See you soon.